Meantime, in New South Wales, the abortion debate is continuing in the Parliament. The New South Wales Attorney-General Mark Speakman has moved a number of amendments to the Greenwich Bill. He joins us live now from Sydney. Attorney-General, thanks so much for your time. What are your amendments and what are you seeking to change?
Well, Rob Stokes and I have proposed a number of amendments to this bill. Our area of particular concern is late-term abortion. I think most people in the community, whatever their personal views about the rights and wrongs and the morality of abortion, accept that it's not an issue that's best dealt with as a criminal matter. But I get the sense that there is significant community concern about what might on the face of the legislation appear to be open slather. I'm not suggesting that's what happens in practice. In fact, I think our medical profession has a lot of standards and procedures that make sure that late-term abortions are relatively rare and done in appropriate circumstances. But I get the sense there is a significant degree of community concern about that. So the amendments we put up for discussion have been looking at addressing that problem. In particular, where late-term abortions are performed, we think they should be more or less in well-equipped public hospitals. The sorts of practitioners that perform late-term abortions, we think that typically they should be obstetricians rather than any old general practitioner. And whether it's possible to put on the face of the legislation some very modest quality assurance, if you like, about these procedures. So that's one area of concern. Another area of concern is that there is nothing on the face of the bill requiring the informed consent of the patient. Look, we accept that that's obviously standard medical practice to get that informed consent, but it's a bit surprising that it's not on the face of the bill. And another area of concern we have is about conscientious objection. I think there's a common acceptance that if a medical practitioner has a conscientious objection to performing a termination, he or she doesn't have to perform that termination. But the question is then what obligation they should have to refer the patient on to someone else or just leave it at that.
When you say late-term abortion, what are you identifying that as in this legislation? Is it beyond 22 weeks or are you wanting to lower that threshold?
Well, look, our amendments are post 22 weeks. The bill distinguishes between terminations below 22 weeks and those above 22 weeks. It proposes the approval of 2 doctors above 22 weeks, and we're looking at strengthening the legislative safeguards in that respect.
There's been some concern that there is a loophole in law at the moment that would allow you to seek a late-term or medium-term abortion on the basis of gender selection. Is that correct?
Well, if this bill is carried, unless it's amended, then basically a woman will be able to obtain an abortion below 22 weeks for any reason. Above 22 weeks, it will require the consent of 2 doctors. My understanding is that a common practice in the hospitals that do these is that if there's an ethical issue, it goes before an ethics committee or an advisory committee of some sort for advice to the doctor. I'd hope if someone was seeking a late-term abortion for sex selection, that'd be knocked back.
Seeking an abortion for sex selection at 20 or 21 weeks or even 16 weeks, does that bother you? And as Attorney-General, will you be seeking to change that?
Well, look, it absolutely does bother me, from a moral viewpoint. I'm someone who believes that life begins well before birth, that all life is precious, and it would be quite immoral to abort a baby on the basis of sex selection.
So what will you be seeking to do aside from this bill? Can you put in those safeguards so that people can't go into hospitals and select like that?
Look, I'm not the only MP. Rob and I are not the only MPs moving amendments. There's a whole smorgasbord of amendments today, and it may well be that someone comes up with an amendment dealing with that.
Yeah, but separate from this bill, is there anything you can do?
Look, probably not. At the end of the day, it's a matter for what is in this bill, what safeguards are in this bill. There are a number of MPs proposing additional changes to this bill. Ultimately, it's a matter of medical ethics and whatever legislative protections are in this legislation.
It seems like you're uncomfortable with the process that has been put forward here, Mr Speakman. You're putting forward these amendments, these 8 amendments. Still, even if those 8 amendments pass, and this passes through the upper house and becomes law, you'll still be able to seek an abortion on gender selection. So will you still be personally voting for this? It is a conscience issue.
Well, look, it is a conscience issue. I'm still considering my position, and that will depend upon what is the final form of the bill. That's what I said in the House the other day. I accept the general principle that this shouldn't be dealt with as a matter of criminal law, but there are a number of community concerns about how far this bill goes. I accept that there are plenty of ethical considerations and procedural safeguards, the way that late-term abortions in particular are done at the moment, but I'd like to see something on the face of the bill. If we are to remove the criminal law, then it should be replaced with something else, in my view, at least something that reflects community values, if you like, doesn't throw women in jail, doesn't stigmatise women for the choices they make, but at least is a legislative reflection of the gravity of the sorts of decisions that are being made.
Mark Speakman, really appreciate your time this morning. It's a very difficult issue.
Thank you, Laura.